Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. You are listening to Transform Your Life with Kellie and Lisa. I, of course, am Kellie, and Lisa is on here, too, this morning. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Kellie. Good morning, everyone.
You know, we've been doing a sort of a series. It was sort of an impromptu thing. It wasn't really planned on domestic violence. And I wanted to spend a couple minutes at the top of this show talking about why it's important to talk about things like domestic violence, like racism, like discrimination, like all of these things that are sort of running rampant these days, it seems again. It seemed like for a while there things were kind of calming down, but now we're back to, you know, all of the hate mongering. And if you've studied spirituality at any depth at all, you know that one of the things that we tell people is don't watch the news. Don't feed your mind with all that negativity. So what's the difference between doing a show or a series of shows on one of these topics and watching the news? And what came to my mind when I heard that question was something that my grandmother told me a long time ago when I was trying to sweep the floor with all the lights off while watching a movie. And her question to me was, how can you see what you're cleaning? You can't see what's dirty if you don't put light on it. And I think that kind of applies here. Louise Hay has also said, how can you clean your house if you don't see the dirt? And in my mind, at least, these issues that are sort of plaguing society are sort of like the dirt that should be cleaned up. And when you look at it that way, it kind of, even within ourselves, we each have that individual dirt. You know, when I wrote my book, When on the Road to Enlightenment, Don't Forget to Take Out the Trash, that's kind of what it was about, was taking out that dirt, really, really cleaning that trash, that garbage out of your life. So I think that's the best way to explain what the difference between having these shows and what we commonly tell people when they're embarking on a spiritual path. What do you think about that, Lisa?
I think you caught me off guard again.
That's my specialty.
It is. Well, you know, I do like listening to you talk, and it's great. So sometimes I feel like I don't necessarily need to talk. So, no, I think that's, you know, with me, we had talked earlier about the responsibility aspect and teaching your children from a young age. And
right.
It's important. Yeah, you can't clean up a mess if you can't see the mess. And I know I was one that asked you about the, you know, we're not supposed to bring in this negative. We're not supposed to focus on all of the negative in the world, because then that can create our space of, you know, with negativity. Excuse me. But I was like, you know, there are problems out there, and we're supposed to allow people to be. And,
right.
You know, it's part of all of the package is we are supposed to allow others to just be. And in my mind, that is, if somebody is a violent person, I'm supposed to allow them to be. But then that doesn't sit right really deep within my soul, because
right.
It goes against the principles of kindness and whatnot. So that explanation that you gave, where we are allowed to bring to light to help end those types of situations, to be advocates for people who are, you know, victims of domestic violence, hate, or, you know, whatnot, that it's okay, because we're not necessarily bringing it into our space in a negative way.
Right, and I think intent plays a huge key there, because if you are intending to shed light on a situation and not internalize it and not make it your own situation and not control anyone else, I think that's very different from someone who is saying, I'm going to internalize this racism. I'm going to internalize this hate, and I'm going to make it my own so that I can really feel it, and I'm just going to think about it all the time. What we're doing is shedding a light on issues that need to be talked about. But at the same time, if you go back and listen to our shows, and this was pointed out to me, this isn't something I came up with, this was pointed out to me by someone who has listened, and her comment was simply that she liked the fact that we were having this discussion, and what she really liked was how we would put a positive spin on it. And I was like, we put a positive spin on it? Wow, we did that? Wow, that's really cool. Because I know, because a lot of times we do these shows and we sort of talk from our hearts. And, what we feel is what we say. And when it touches people, that, in my mind, is reinforcement that we're absolutely doing the right thing. So I think the intent is also very, very important. But you touched on something, responsibility. And also at the forefront of my mind this morning is the importance of preventing these things from happening in the first place. Wouldn't it be great if each and every one of us took personal responsibility for not buying into racism or discrimination or bullying or domestic violence or whatever it is? If each person took personal responsibility for teaching their children coping skills, teach your kid, what do you do when you get upset? What do you do when you're really angry? Kids need to be taught these things, and I think a lot of times they're not. Recently I had a discussion with a local teacher who said her biggest issue is that kids come to school without a concept of personal responsibility. They have not been taught that they're responsible for doing their work, that they are responsible for bringing to school those things that they need to bring to school, or for taking home those things that they need to take home. And that kind of triggered in my mind that maybe that's where the issue lies, is with responsibility. So how do we teach our kids responsibility? I mean, I know what I did with my daughter. I just sort of let her know that there were, repercussions when she did or didn't do things. But how do we really instill in our kids that concept of taking personal responsibility, of being responsible for being a good person, being responsible for being a kind person? I think responsibility goes beyond schoolwork. I think responsibility goes beyond owning a mistake. I think responsibility goes a lot deeper than that. I think it's sort of at our core what we need to be. We need to be responsible for ourselves. So,
I have
yeah, how do we teach that? Yeah.
And that's, you asked the question, how do we teach that? And I'm like, I have no idea. I have two children that live in my home full time. I have two children that do not live in my home full time. The two that live with me full time, one is responsible to a point. She's not like me, but from when I was her age, but she doesn't like to be to school late. She doesn't like to be signed out early. She gets the chores done that I ask to get done. And we don't call them chores. We call them household contributions, or your responsibilities, towards your house, because helping me with the dishes, or feeding the animals that Dad and I buy food for, and we pay the mortgage and everything else, we teach household contribution. You are contributing to the house because that is part of everybody has to contribute to the operations of the household. So that my son wants to go and do a few of the dishes and then run back and watch the television or get on the computer again and then run back to the dishes and back and forth. And it'll take him like an hour to get a 5-minute chore done. Whereas my daughter will just jump right into it and get everything done that she's supposed to get done. However, don't go into her bedroom. It looks like a war zone.
Right.
And it's interesting to see the difference in my two children as far as that goes. My son, it's hard to explain. You just kind of have to see it. But they are two totally separate people when it comes to responsibility. My son is scatterbrained. The only thing that gets put in its spot is his backpack when he walks in the door and his baseball bag when he walks in the door. Other than that, there's like I'm taking my shirt off in the kitchen and leaving it on the floor. I might not know where I put my glasses. My shoes are in 2 different rooms of the house. That's my son, whereas my daughter is a lot more on the organized side than that. And that's what I deal with them. As far as, the responsibility to be a good human towards other people, my son has been getting from a very early age, you are the one that's in control of your actions. You're the one that's in control of your emotions. They didn't do it to you, or they may have done something to you, but you're the one that's responsible for how you react. You're the one that's in charge of how you let it affect you. My daughter's only recently got that. They've been getting it the same amount of time, but my daughter's much older. So
right.
With that, that's how I teach them about their own personal, emotional control. Or, the bully on the playground, you're the one who is ultimately responsible for your emotions. Now, that doesn't mean we might not need to get you therapy or something along those lines. But ultimately what it comes down to is you're the one that chooses to be happy or to let those people affect your brain and the way that you feel about yourself.
Right.
So,
I think you hit on something really important there, is that we are all each an individual. There are no 2 of us that are exactly alike. And I think a piece of teaching responsibility is also letting people be who they are. We don't want to make our kids into little, robots. We want them to be thinking, feeling beings, with a consciousness. We don't want to try and form them. And I think that's part of the reason that teachers in upper grades are having such difficulty with so many kids is that in the lower grades, rather than finding out how each child is an individual and teaching that way and helping each kid, there are so many kids in each class that teachers don't have time for that. They literally don't have time for that. And then when these kids get into the upper grades, the teachers are just at a loss because these kids are not held accountable. These kids have never been held accountable. They don't know how to be held accountable, and no one has really ever reached them. And I know in many parts of the country the dropout rates are still enormously high. I know in the area I live in it's improved dramatically over the last 5 years or so. But the reason it improved is because the local school district here made a concerted effort to bring on more teachers and to limit the number of kids in each class at the lower grades. And that is part of the reason the local school that's down the street from my house has like 27 kids total in the entire school from grades kindergarten through 8th.
Wow.
Is because they made each district smaller. So, that's sort of, and it's a nationally distinguished school or whatever that title is, but that happened when they limited the number of kids, when they made the school districts smaller. And I don't know that every school district could do that. In fact, I know they can't. But there has to be something that we can do. And I honestly believe that it starts at home. It starts when your kids are very small. I know when my daughter was, probably 2 or 3, I made a game with her. We had this big barrel where all her toys were stored. And it was at my grandmother's house because at that point I was with my grandmother with my daughter. And we made a game out of taking the toys out of the barrel. She would dump the whole thing on the floor. So it was like, a toy store exploded in the living room. And we made a game. How quickly can you pick up all those toys and put them in the barrel? And we'd set an egg timer. And if she beat her previous time, we had this huge celebration. Well, we would have a dance party because that's what she was at that time. She liked to dance. But, but that's what I did with her. And it worked with her because I knew what rewarded her. I knew that she was competitive naturally, and I knew that she loved music and liked to dance. So, we would jump around the living room like fools with whatever music she wanted to listen to until she was done. Her celebration was over. Yay, Jenna. It was really crazy, but that was something I stumbled on. That wasn't something that I studied my child and figured out what motivated. That wasn't any of that. It was just I knew who she was, and I used that to help her realize that she had to be responsible. And it's funny because when I hear her talking today about responsibility with her stepson, she always brings that up. That's always the story she tells, and she could not have possibly been more than 3 when that happened. Because when she was 3, I was living somewhere else. But that couldn't possibly. How does she remember that? But she does, and it made that big of an impact on her. So I think that's key is helping your kids find out who they are and what motivates them. I guarantee you what motivates my daughter is not the same thing that motivates me. When I was a kid, the last thing I wanted to do was throw a dance party with my mom and grandmother or great-grandmother.
Right.
I just wouldn't have been, But we have to teach our kids to be individuals and at the same time teach them to take responsibility and kind of how to be a good person, how to not hate and how to not hit people and how to prejudge people or make assumptions. Because many times those are wrong. Yesterday I recorded an interview with a beautiful young woman named Maddie who's going to be on my upcoming Inspirational People series. And this kid, she has taken martial arts. She actually, I said karate, and she says, well, it's more like martial arts. So, okay, martial arts. And she is also a wrestler. And she went to a wrestling match, and I guess you have to draw who you wrestle. And I don't really know. I am not a wrestler. But the person she drew was easily 3 times her size, easily. Wow. And I said, wow, what did you do? And she said, well, I just looked at her, and I said, you know what, I can take her. I'm a good wrestler. And she made that point. She says, everybody went, in the crowd, everybody went, oh, because they just assumed that this bigger kid was going to win. But I was determined to prove them wrong, and I won. And she did. She won against this person that was 3 times her size. And I said, how did you win? What were you thinking during the match? And she said, I was thinking I wasn't going to let everybody else's assumptions be mine. And this kid is 12.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, wow, what a terrific lesson about assuming things. Now, in her case, it was, a very specific assumption. But how often in society do we make assumptions about people who are homeless?
Right.
Or people who are different. And I think that's something really important to teach our kids, is that people are people, and really we're all connected and we're all one. And I think if we start with these things, we won't have domestic violence. We won't have hate because we can teach a whole generation of kids. It has to start with the kids. But we have to teach them to see people as people.
It's interesting. My son last night, I was putting him to bed, and he was talking about one of his friends who has a little bit darker skin than he does. My son doesn't like to say black people. He just doesn't like it at all, and he doesn't want to be called racist. And I said, son, it is okay. It's absolutely okay to say that. And he's like, well, the kid who has a little darker skin than me, and he just really doesn't like to use that term. And so for me, we were talking about how my child is scatterbrained, and I really would just love his shoes to be in the same room. They don't even have to be put away right at this point, in the same room. But at the same time, I have this child who just on Sunday we went to eat as a family at a restaurant, and there was a gentleman sitting outside who just was wanting to eat. And my son asked me if we could, after dinner, go next door and buy him some snack-type foods that he can, give to this gentleman. So here I have this child who is always looking out for other people, but might not be able to put his shoes away or takes too long to empty the dishwasher. So how do I find that equal balance? And that's very interesting, and as you said, it starts with our children and watching the world through my son's eyes, which I did with my daughter when she was little, but then something within me changed, and of course, working a lot and, joining the military and moving away for a year and what have you, I stopped. I understand her. We have a connection. We have a open dialogue. We can talk, but I don't see the world through her lens as much as I look forward to seeing the world through my 10-year-old's lens. And so
right.
I know that didn't really have a whole lot to do with the show, but I just had to put that out.
Well, no, but it's important. And, I think we have done, the last several shows have been rather heavy. And, I wanted to wrap up the series on domestic violence with moving forward. We have taken a very, very dark topic, and we've shined as bright a light on it as we could muster. And now we need to move on. And I think that is really the key, is moving on. We've been talking about responsibility, and in my mind, responsibility kind of goes hand in hand with self-esteem. Because when you make a child responsible for loading the dishwasher or cleaning their room or getting good grades, when you give them that responsibility, ultimately you're helping them build their self-esteem, their sense of self. They learn what it feels like to accomplish things, what it learns to be held accountable and to come through. And even if they don't do something, they learn what it feels like to disappoint someone. And I think that is just as valid. I did a post this morning on Facebook that was about responsibility. It says, take responsibility for your mistakes, and take responsibility for when you've let someone you love down, but don't forget to take responsibility as well for those successes you've had and for all those things you've done right. And I think we kind of forget that. We forget what responsibility is all about and how it builds self-esteem, especially for kids. And nothing has ever made me feel better in my life than doing something that I took responsibility for, and it went well, and it helped people, and it made other people happy. That was very fulfilling to me. And I think if we teach kids what that fulfillment is like, what's it like to take responsibility for your actions and then decide to do something really, really good or helpful, how does that feel? Because that really, more than anything else, in early on in my life, that made a huge difference with me. I was very lucky to have had a grandmother who was amazing. in every way, light years ahead of her time. But she worked at a nursing home. And when I was old enough, or when she felt I was old enough, she would take me and have me volunteer. And it's a singer-songwriter than anything else. And I would take my guitar and I would sing to these people in the nursing home. And I got more out of that than anything else. And it was just simply the love exchange. I am being responsible for being as good a person as I can be. And in exchange, these people are showing me true appreciation for having taken that responsibility. That was a huge self-esteem builder for me.
You know, one thing I do with my children, I told you they have household contributions. Some people believe in giving their children allowances, monthly or daily or whatever, payments. And for me, it's more along the lines of, you know that Wi-Fi that you're connecting your phone and your computer and your tablet to? Yeah.
Yes.
That's not free. You know, the food that you're putting in your mouth, that's not free either. The fact that you have a phone and a tablet and a computer, that's, I could have made you save up for that. Probably
right.
should have done that earlier, for my children, making them earn some more of the things that they wanted as far as like mowing my lawn or whatever. But I didn't do that. But what I do with their household contributions is I thank them for doing them. I tell them why it's important, and I praise them. When I have them scrub the bathroom and we're really, doing the heavy scrubbing of the house or whatever, that's a little more than I expect my children to do, and so they definitely get, thank you, y'all did such a great job raking the leaves in the backyard, or thank you so much for the great job on getting that living room. We move the furniture off quite often and sweep under it and pull the cushions to make sure there's nothing in the cushions of the couch or whatever. Thank you. Y'all did such a great job. I couldn't have got it done as fast as it got done if it wasn't for y'all's help and whatnot. So I'm constantly giving them, I don't know that you can overpraise a child if you're doing it the right way.
Right.
If you're doing it the right way, I feel that praise is not building a participation trophy kid. I don't believe in participation trophies. I don't believe you should get a trophy because you're
for showing up.
Your team lost every game, but yay, here's the participate. I don't know. I am kind of torn between that one too, but I feel like you can praise children. You can find ways to praise children to make it authentic and to make it to where it's not being overdone.
Right.
To where you're raising a child who does have healthy self-esteem, but doesn't necessarily need outside affirmations that they're. For me, a lot of times, like, I'll cook a meal and I'll eat it and I know it tastes good, but I want my family to tell me it tastes good. What do you think?
Right.
Do you like it? Do you want me to do it again? I don't need. I do need that. I need them to give me that feedback and to tell me I did a great job. I'm working on not, just being comfortable enough with my own opinion and knowing that I did a good job, but for the longest time I wasn't in the kitchen, and I was actually fired from cooking for my family. That's possible, apparently. You can get fired from cooking for your own family. And so, getting that feedback, I was fired. Anyway, getting that feedback is important to me, because at one time they didn't want me cooking for them. They were like, no, you're not doing this anymore. So, anyway,
well,
so I feel like you can praise kids.
I think that teaching kids to compliment the chef is polite behavior. I really think that if someone cooks for you, for anyone, you should say, thank you, that was delicious, even if it was the worst thing you ever put in your mouth, because someone went to that effort for you.
Right.
And I think somewhere along the line we've stopped being polite. We've stopped teaching what polite behavior really looks like. And, in my opinion, and I have many opinions, but, in my opinion, that's one of the problems that we're seeing now is kids aren't taught that it's polite behavior to give someone a compliment when they do things for them. So, yeah, I think that's a great point. I did not know you could be fired by your family either, but that's good. That's good information. I hope you keep it in mind.
Well, I'm not sure what actually peaked being fired. I don't know if it was when I made the eggs explode or I can't remember the exact thing in the kitchen. And they're like, "Yeah, Mom, we're just gonna." If something tasted really disgusting, I took out chicken from the freezer, and it felt like we were eating dirt. That's how the chicken, I don't know what was wrong with this chicken. It wasn't my cooking. It was the actual product that I was cooking.
Right.
But,
probably
yeah.
freezer burn or something. Yeah.
They're like,
that's
funny.
funny.
You're not allowed to be in the kitchen anymore. So I was like, okay.
That's funny.
That's fine with me. So, yeah.
That's great. You touched on something else that I kind of want to expand on, and we mentioned and we talked a little bit about the participation trophy thing. I think when we start giving things like a participation program or trophy, it really weakens the whole program the kids have gone through, in my mind. Because we put our kids in things like baseball or football or whatever activity they're in order for them to learn social skills, learn, maybe the physical skills, maybe they have a natural talent for it. That's awesome. They can learn a lot there. But most of the kids who go into Little League sports are never going to be great at those sports. So I think we need to put the focus back on the original lessons. The original lessons are that some people are naturally gifted at sports, some people are not. If you're not, you can still have a great time. It's not okay that you just show up and get rewarded for it. And I think we've made kids I don't have to do anything because I'm, going to be given a trophy anyway. So I don't even have to try because I know at the end of the season we're going to get a trophy. And I think that really diminishes the whole thing in my mind.
Right.
And then you have kids that have the attitude of entitlement. Well, now what are you going to give me? Well, now what are you going to do for me?
Right.
So that's a pet peeve that I have. I don't like the let's reward people for just showing up. Because yes, everyone is exactly the way they're supposed to be. And everyone is the exact perfect them that they can be. But we can all grow. We can all get better at things. We can all learn. And we should be learning and growing. And I think rewarding kids just for being there is not helping them grow. It's not helping them learn. It's not helping them move forward.
Right.
So I wanted to expand on that a little bit because it's so prevalent. And then you have kids who are problems for teachers because they feel like, well, I'm here. You should give me an A just for being here.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. No, I was just going to say, I know people listening are going, well, that's not true. Kids don't do that. Well, I have a number of friends that are teachers. Yes, they do that.
Well, a couple of years ago, I wanted to give my personal experience. I was doing a long-term substitute teaching position at an elementary school I was a 5th grade science teacher. And the way that the rotations worked is I would have 3 classes come through for me to teach science. The last class of the day was with me the longest because that was my homeroom class. So they would meet with me at the end of the day. That's when we talk about important papers that needed to be filled out or, things along those lines. I'd do homeroom stuff with them, discussing their grades and things along those lines. So they would come to me and they were with me for a very long chunk of the day, like 2.5 hours or so. And they would have in that 2.5 hours, it wasn't all science. It was broken up. We would do like 15 minutes of RTI, which was like tutoring. And then there was even another tutoring session even after that. Lunch was involved, recess, all that good stuff. Well, I had the trouble class. And when I say the trouble class, most of my children that were in that classroom were the troublemakers. They were the ones that were always getting in trouble. They were the ones with the highest rate of attention deficit, among the whole group. They were ones who came from really bad backgrounds, family life and whatnot. They were all clumped into this one class. There was one particular student that always comes to mind, only because of the story that I'm getting ready to tell. So she was constantly in trouble. Demerits, after they got so many check marks, they weren't allowed to have recess, and they would have to sit at a certain table during lunch. They weren't even allowed to interact with their fellow students because they were in detention. They got lunch from detention. If the behavior was so bad, then they would have to go to the principal and whatnot. But most of mine were because the kids wouldn't stop talking.
Right.
And it's one thing to have a conversation. It's another thing to have a conversation when the teacher is talking and trying to give you information that you need to know, and it's not, group homework time or whatever. And she ended up having a conversation with somebody across my classroom, and they both got in trouble. The other participant didn't get in trouble that often, but the one girl, she was constantly in trouble for talking. So her parents decided, her mom actually, wanted to have a conference with the school, with her group of teachers, because there was 4 of us, with her group of teachers and the principal. So we all met with this mother to discuss her child. And it was, y'all are bullying my daughter. She doesn't want to come to school anymore. That's her personality. That's who she is. She's a talker. And I'm like, it's fine to be a talker, but it's not fine to talk when I'm in the middle of a lecture. And it's sure not fine to talk about Justin Bieber when I'm in the middle of a science lesson, because you're not allowed to take away from the other students' learning. You don't have the right. You don't have to listen to my lecture, but you don't have the right to take away from other kids. I had kids asking me if they could leave my classroom and be assigned to another homeroom. That's how bad this class was.
Wow.
And it was the majority of them. I mean, and she thought we were, honing in on her daughter only, and we're like, oh no, here's other records. Of course, we couldn't show names, but there's 7 of them sitting at the detention table because they can't stop talking. I had one kid, he would just get up and start wandering around. And as long as he wasn't bothering anybody, I didn't mind him getting up and wandering around, because that's how he needed that movement to focus.
Right.
But for her to come in and say, that's my daughter's her personality, you're crushing her spirit, wasn't fair to the teachers. Because, no, I'm not crushing your spirit. I'm asking you to cut it, to just pull it back a little bit for, an hour. Just pull it back in. Let's just harness that spirit, because I don't want to break your spirit. But there are certain laws of society that you have to follow.
Right.
And so that's what we got from this parent. There were other parents of other kids that were not in my homeroom. There was this one kid, he was constantly getting into fights. Constantly. I swear he was in a fight like every day. He was in ISS more that time period than he was in my classroom. Now, I came in late at the end of the year, and this was not just because I came in and had no classroom management or whatever. This was throughout the entire year for these kids.
Right.
So, yes, I worked with the adjustment of not having their teacher there anymore, the person that they started with. I worked with them through that, but, this was something that was a pattern for them. Well, this one kid that was constantly fighting, the dad walks in, and cusses out the principal.
Wow.
So, yeah, exactly. Wow. My son and my daughter, if there was ever a time I was called into the principal's office, I wasn't making excuses for my kid. I would support my kid. There was one time my son smacked somebody in the face, and I was called into the principal's office, and I was like, you know what? I understand you have to do what you have to do. I do not condone violence. But let me tell you one thing. Now that you know that my son can actually lash out like this, you need to keep an eye on the kid that's causing the problems for my son to want to react this way. But I'll talk to my son about he is responsible for his own actions and his own reactions and his own emotions. But this kid harasses and bullies the crap out of my kid. So if this kid doesn't back off and my son hits him again, now you know you've got a problem on your hands, because now I can act against that, And I don't condone violence, but I don't. But when you're walking away and the person's constantly following you and continually following you, and you're asking them to stop and you're trying to walk away, and you get into a situation where now you can't walk away or you're going to get in trouble, he smacked someone. And I didn't go into the office raising Cain and saying, no, you can't put my son in suspension. You need to do something about this other kid. I didn't do that. And so my son saw that, wow, Mom, she loves me and she supports me, but she's not going to let me get away with that kind of thing. You do the crime, you do the time. I took a whole lot of time right there. I'm so sorry. I was just rambling.
No, I think that's key, though. I think that's key, though, because we do have to teach. That goes back to the beginning of our show. We do have to teach responsibility, and we have to take people back. I am having a horrible time talking today. We have to teach our kids to take responsibility, that there are things in society, there are laws, there are rules that everyone is expected to abide by. And when you break those, even if you're in the right, how many protesters who are protesting very, very, very valid causes get arrested. They're not getting arrested for their beliefs. They're getting arrested because they broke a law. There have been many other cases where protesters have obtained the permits that they are required to obtain. They didn't get arrested. So it's all about teaching our kids they have to obey the rules, they have to obey the laws, they have to take responsibility. And I really think that's where it starts. And if we can start teaching the kids those lessons, we'll go a long way towards abolishing things like racism and hatred and domestic violence and all of these other things that we've talked about. We are out of time, so I want to thank you for the conversation, because this is one of those shows that I think we'll look back on and go, wow, there was a lot of great stuff there. I know our listeners have enjoyed it, so thank you guys for listening. Everybody have a beautiful, beautiful day. Bye.
Bye, everyone.